Clubine and Jon Tellis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jon Tellis, and I am an accountant, and Andy Clubine is a lawyer, and today we'll be discussing life, death, taxes, and Bitcoin. What will your legacy be? Our professional experiences in private client services, philanthropy, and Bitcoin advisory, but this isn't just technical work, this is human work that comes as a byproduct of what we've done for a living. Anyone can do a tax return, anyone can do a will, but almost no one who specializes in these areas is also a Bitcoin maxi. So think of this as creative work, abstract thinking, philosophy, for the questions that keep you up at night regarding your Bitcoin stack.
This is on? Yeah, there it is. For several years, John and I have been thinking about how each of our professions might speak to Bitcoiners' challenges with law, taxes, business building, and now we're moving into thinking about family office services through a project we're working on called Generatio. The idea is that Bitcoin offers not only the possibility of wealth that lasts for generations, but of building a legacy that lasts for generations. We're inspired by several themes, one of which is memento mori, remembering your death. That's why the Poussin painting is up here. Bitcoin's value is derived in part from the fact that it is finite. And in a similar way, the value of our lives is in part derived by the fact of our finitude. So memento mori is another way of communicating the age-old wisdom that we are dust and to it will return. In life, as in Bitcoin, finitude is one of our only constants. So, as professional advisors to Bitcoiners, the end is where we begin. What will happen to your stack? Who will benefit from it? Will it even be accessible when you're gone? We're not here to talk about death per se, but to consider how Bitcoiners like you, people who have or who will eventually have more than they need, might start to think about the legacy they'll leave behind. So, in this presentation, we're going to cover 3 topics. The first one is problems associated with Bitcoin. And for us, custody is just square one. We hear a lot of talk about custody. That's only the first question. After that, there are a whole lot of other problems that need to be addressed, many of which have to do with law, with taxes. In the second part, we'll talk about strategies for protecting Bitcoin wealth. And in the final part, we'll talk about how Bitcoin can build, renew families, institutions, communities, and culture, and how to essentially build your Bitcoin legacy. Some thoughts from us, not prescriptions.
So make no mistake, while we are not anarchists, we do realize how many of you feel about governments and authority, but remember that it was extreme pressure that motivated the creation of something as beautiful as Bitcoin. An elegant solution to a terrible problem with our financial system and way of life. So rather than viewing planning as a burden, consider viewing it as an opportunity. You know, Bitcoin as a technology has empowered a very different conversation and has redefined what wealth even is. You can't compare Bitcoin really as a bearer instrument to a stock or to a bond, or to a high income or to a business. It's something completely different, and yet it is the same.
So before we say anything more, we have to give the obligatory disclaimer that John is indeed an accountant, but he's not your accountant. I am a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. This is all information. In fact, it's thoughts, it's musings. It is not legal advice or tax advice.
So one thing that I have learned from working with people who have a lot of money is that when you don't have any, you think it will solve all of your problems. But then when you do have money, you realize that it cannot. There is a great responsibility that comes with being a Bitcoiner, but so too is there a great responsibility that comes with being wealthy and complying with numerous laws and regulations.
As an iconic philosopher once mused, mo money, mo problems. And this applies to Bitcoin, and maybe especially to Bitcoin. There's a weight to hodling a stack with many of the same weights that comes with wealth in the sort of traditional finance world or real estate or what have you, and a whole added set of layers of complexity. So wealthy Bitcoiners have the same problems: law, taxes, estates, wealth management, family governance, personal relationships, and then those are compounded by technical problems with Bitcoin, regulatory issues, unpredictability of regulations, advisory issues. There's lots to think about. So when we begin with the end in mind, how we begin to attack these questions is, what are your goals? We ask two main questions. What happens to your assets, or in this case your Bitcoin, when you die? What happens if you don't die? So when you die, and this was covered a little bit by Morgan in the last presentation, there's some differences in jurisdiction, but generally speaking, you and your heirs will be subject to one or more taxes: capital gains, estate taxes, inheritance tax. In Canada, where we're from, for example, you'll be deemed to have disposed of your assets and bought them back at the moment of your death, triggering capital gains. Unless you've planned in advance to mitigate, but it's not something you can do at the moment. You're gone, your family's already suffering the consequences of the taxes that are gonna have to be paid if you haven't mitigated for them. So on your death, your executor will take charge of your assets. In many jurisdictions, like Morgan mentioned, it's a probate asset. There could be problems with actually getting custody of the Bitcoin. You might say, well, you know, I'm not going to put it in my will, I'm not going to declare it, the government has nothing to do with this. Well, that's great, but it's all the same to the tax man. So unless you're an OG who has never bought KYC Bitcoin, that's kind of a dumb approach, to be honest. If you've ever bought KYC, even if it's not your whole stack, there's some identifier out there between you and your stack, and so rather than run from it, you know, our position as advisors, at least, is to flag the risk of you pretending it's not there. Even if you don't want to think about death, there are many things that can happen in life that could compromise your stack. You could get married, you could have kids, you could get divorced, you could have a situationship, relationship, all of a sudden you're living a year together and you live in a common law country and you're deemed spouses, and guess what? That deems them rights to your assets if you split up. You could build a business, you could sell a business. That business might have Bitcoin as a treasury asset, but you might be holding it personally and now the business sues you. You could go bankrupt, you could default on a mortgage. All of these things are things that happen in life that sitting here we might not think they actually have to do with our stack, but they do, because our stack is part of the assets we hold. It might be the majority of the assets you hold. So, what to take away from this laundry list is a custody solution is not an estate plan. A custody solution is not a wealth plan. If that's all you're thinking about, that's a losing strategy.
That's very enlightening. So what does a winning strategy look like? To me, and the way we like to frame it, is just simply peace of mind and a good night's sleep. The things we own end up owning us, and Bitcoin is no different. So simplicity, minimalism, pragmatism need to be top of mind for your planning. So legal and tax are just two of several attack vectors, many attack vectors that are often underestimated by Bitcoiners in our experience, and also the importance of personal accountability and transparency. You know, it's easy to say, it's easy to tweet, it's hard to actually do, but if you don't deal with these challenges that you have, you will pass them on to the next generation one way or another, because like money, no one will care about your Bitcoin as much as you. So keep it simple. How do we do that? As Andy said, you know, let's say you're a 7-figure Bitcoiner. You've been stacking sats, you've been staying humble. At a bare minimum, set up a last will and testament for your death and a power of attorney for your life, so that if something happens to you or you become impaired, there are clear, well thought out instructions documented in such a way that someone other than you can understand. And yes, Bitcoin does have to be included in your will, as Andy said, like any other asset. Think about life insurance. It's simple, it's inexpensive, it's a tax-free hedge. And even independent of your Bitcoin stack, if you have a couple of kids, a spouse, a mortgage, it just brings peace of mind because it's something simple to deal with if the worst should occur. And lastly is chain of custody. I know I'm big on the don't trust, verify, but when you're gone, you're gonna have to trust someone. So who's gonna be your executor? Like, how will you ensure that your coins end up in the right hands when you are gone? It's not as easy as you might think if you're not here to stick handle it. So the takeaway here is if you just think about these three things and do even just one, like your will, you'll be ahead of the vast majority of Bitcoiners by just acknowledging that one day you will no longer be here, take responsibility for that by being proactive and plan for the inevitable and set an intention to work backwards from there. Now, the other scenario is, say you're an 8 or a 9-figure Bitcoiner. You've been through a few cycles, or maybe you aspire to go through a few cycles and become this type of person, a grizzled veteran of the game. Congratulations, you will then be known as a high net worth individual. And so what do? Advice I would say is to consider how that extreme wealth can impair your judgment. The story I like to tell is of an ex-computer hacker, one of the best in the world, who created the first bi-directional fiber optic line between the New York Stock Exchange and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And that helps keep the lights on in the American fiat system. And as a side project, this individual mined 180,000 Bitcoin long ago. And what they said was that they needed a therapist to just understand the magnitude of what they built. Everything else seemed to pale in comparison. So just put that into, top of mind. It's like it wasn't a technical issue. It's just a human issue. So in that respect, you need an estate plan. I could tell you need a statement of net worth, a clear picture of where you are, something you should revisit regularly with tax projections and cash flows. But the bigger consideration is that because you had Bitcoin and because it's a bearer instrument and because you might have bought it for a low price and it's worth a lot, you've already established an estate plan, whether you formalize it or not. And so you might have given cash gifts to friends early on in your Bitcoin journey. You might have set unrealistic expectations when Bitcoin was low and you gave away many. And they expect you to do the same, not only while you were alive, but also when you are gone and remember you in your wills. So you won't be there to fight with your family, and your heirs may have to do it. So family governance is critically important here, which I'll talk about in my next slide. And the last thing I'll say is that a lot of amazing Bitcoin projects out there, and they wouldn't be possible without the funding of a lot of OGs. But when you sprinkle Bitcoin around, you sprinkle money around, you sprinkle influence and business investment around in different jurisdictions, and you complicate your life, again, whether you formalize a plan or not. So each of those choices can have significant tax or legal consequences, and they also leave behind a paper trail for those regulated businesses with respect to the Bitcoin that you invested in it. So you need to ensure that you at least have professional support should you have questions so that you can address some of these challenges. So as Michael Saylor once said, think of your Bitcoin as like a yacht, as floating capital, and that is the subject of our presentation later today, discussing residency, geopolitical arbitrage, I should say, and flag theory. But the bigger idea to ponder here is how your Bitcoin will travel into the seas of the future and how it will fare against the many storms it will have to overcome in order to survive. So as I said, it may not be a technical accounting, tax, or legal question you have to answer, because ultimately your heirs in the future will need to understand the importance of what you built, why you built it, how to steward that wealth and Bitcoin responsibly so it can continue on. So how do you do that? From my perspective, it requires you to look backwards and forwards. So you make the connection between an older, more traditional value as well as newer technological advances. So you think of a painting. It's something very, very fragile, but it has moved from the past into the present and endured a lot of challenges to be here for us to appreciate. So how are you going to get a vision of what your future and legacy are going to be? You need to appropriately design your citadel and supporting structure while thinking about the two different ends of history and the building and ongoing maintenance that it will require. And so once you have that picture in mind, someone can set it up for you and take care of the rest, so you can be free of the unnecessary stresses, to live your life. Otherwise, what's the point of being wealthy? Hiding in plain sight versus hoping they don't catch me. So a lot of this wealth also has been built up in a very short period of time, and the tax man wants their pound of flesh. So normally you would have decades to properly plan, but there is talk of egregious tax measures coming. So if you know you're already swimming naked, don't pass on your problems to the next generation by thinking you can outsmart the tax authorities by ignoring or avoiding your responsibilities. Consensus regulation is good for number go up, and we've seen that lately, but it does come at the cost of transparency and taxation, and that's just one of the many trade-offs that you'll have to accept being a Bitcoiner. Bitcoin is the mother of all honeypots, and sooner or later, they will likely find you, so please prepare and protect yourself through legal means, like smart, wealthy people have done for generations. And lastly, Bitcoin is predictable, but humans are unpredictable. The network is secure enough to store your money, maybe forever. The question is whether your plan is secure enough to avoid the inevitable human error and family squabbles. So Andy and I deal with people who have both extreme wealth and complex technology, and so family governance is critically important. You need a resilient framework in place with appropriate fiduciaries accountable for their areas of expertise to help your heirs in the future. But the real question here is, how do you screen people? And so what I tell people is that it's not that complicated. Just think about the mental blocks that you went through to become a Bitcoiner. Everyone is divided on different issues these days, and chances are people will be divided in the future. So how do you find the right person to navigate an unpredictable world? And so I would say to ask your professionals the same difficult questions that they ask you. Are they a Bitcoiner? Have they planned for their own demise with respect to owning a complicated asset? How do they feel about some of these divisive issues in the world? I think of one example where someone had a question because they had a hardware wallet in a different tax jurisdiction, and a Big Four accounting firm would tell you, you need tens of thousands of dollars of planning, to make sure if you die, that hardware wallet represents some sort of residency in that jurisdiction. What I would say is, just go fly over and bring it back. Just go get it back. That's just the cost of a plane ticket. But these are some of the basic mistakes that professionals make because they don't appreciate the position you're in because they're not in it themselves. And so they're trying to give you advice from a place that is not authentic. So the right advisors are out there, but you need to sort of trust your judgment and your intuition that made you wealthy, successful, and intelligent to begin with, and use that knowledge to choose the right people to work with who have skin in the game just like you.
So, like we mentioned in the opening, we work with clients to both protect wealth, but then also to build with it. You can sit on a stack forever. You don't share your keys. You don't build something with it. It goes and becomes a donation to the rest of us. But what is left as a memory or as a legacy? The assumption here is that there's something valuable in thinking about our legacy. So some of you might just be here exploring Bitcoin. For some of you, it might just be an asset in your portfolio. Others might have an allocation that anyone outside this conference would think is degenerate. Some of you are fully on zero. But regardless of the extent to which you've reoriented your financial life around Bitcoin, holding better money not only has the potential of wealth for generations, I'm assuming you're holding it for that reason, but also, like I said, a legacy for generations. So I've got some thoughts to share about that, and before I do, I've got a few assumptions. So I'm guessing that most of you got into Bitcoin in part because you see problems in our existing monetary order, in how the services or products that you provide to the world are valued, other social issues, and somehow that was part of your trail into being a Bitcoiner. I'm assuming that we understand Bitcoin is better money than what we've got, that it's an opportunity to build generational wealth. Perhaps that you're motivated to actually use it to do something good. Good, that's a heavy word. I'm not, assuming that I know what you think is good, but I'm assuming you maybe see possibilities where you can make your life, your family's life, your community's life, the world's life better. I'm also assuming that there's a difference between potential gains and actual gains. When number goes up on a screen, for the most part, it's not actualized until it's sold or it's leveraged, right? It's only potential until it's actualized and something happens in the world. And so Bitcoin is not just magic internet money. It exists in the real world. You might not agree with all of those assumptions, but whether you do or not, there's an inevitable question that arises for people with wealth, whether it's Bitcoin or otherwise. When I have more than what I need, what do I do with the rest? With wealth comes responsibility, and there's a difference between building your stack and building with your stack. Building your stack is maybe that protection piece, the preparation, the estate planning, wealth management, family governance. But then building with your stack, what a position to be in. Like, that's a position of freedom, but it can be also a scary one. You might be sitting there thinking, well, you know what, Andrew, I don't actually have that much Bitcoin. I'm not thinking about this yet. And I suggest you should. One, because that stack is going to be worth more in the years to come. And two, because whether you know it or not, you are already creating your plan. Even if you don't have a will, even if you don't have an estate plan, based on the choices that you make with whatever you have now, those are the patterns that are going to follow you. So if when the price pumps, you decide to reward yourself with a nice new car, that is a plan. That is a set of patterns that will become your plan until you change otherwise. If you've sort of been pity funding your friends who now have come to rely on you because you're sort of the wealthy one, that is a plan. That's like an orientation of your wealth that will continue unless you plan otherwise. Same if you're miserly and you never spend a sat. Well, it might follow you to the grave, and that is your plan, and it won't change until you decide otherwise. So the work that we do is not just about protecting wealth, but about leveraging it to build a legacy consciously, to ask, what are your goals? How do we design structures and plans for you to arrive at them? Whether those goals are your own comfort, your family's comfort, growth in your community, building a business, what have you. The two main traditional avenues for this are building a business, donating to charity. It's kind of a standard founder's story. I don't think we need to comment on those much. But there is another mode of building that I think Bitcoin allows us to return to. It's an older mode that new money can help us think about anew, and it's patronage. Patronage is essentially a sponsorship of a cause. It's not limited to charitable causes, so it can be used to fund all sorts of things. Communities, cultural and aesthetic production, which God knows we're in dire need of. As some people have suggested, at this point, maybe only beauty can save us. So let's take the example of art. Patronage is how the world's greatest artists were able to produce the work they did, and that has endured for generations since. Patrons participated in the making of art by ensuring the artist had what they needed not only to do their work, but to live life. In the fiat world, patronage is not really possible because it becomes more expensive over time. But with Bitcoin, as it appreciates against fiat, a patron can fund an artist's full career with a single well-managed grant. At scale, Bitcoin could actually be one of the biggest shifts in arts and cultural production that we've seen in centuries, because it returns us to a low preference mindset, and that's what's needed to build the art, the buildings, elements of culture that have lasted. That's a taste of the vision. That's a taste of how we hope you as fellow Bitcoiners and we can learn to start thinking about Bitcoin beyond just the asset, beyond just custody, but looking at it as one, something to steward well for you and your family, and two, something that sets you free to build something good, something long-lasting, something that you're proud to call your legacy. So thank you for listening. I hope this was useful to you. You're welcome to follow us or get in touch. Find us later in the conference. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.